The coffin was already in the ground when he decided to leave her. The last clump of dirt hit the wood with a dull final sound, and the mourners began to drift away in quiet clusters, whispering condolences that felt rehearsed. Black umbrellas folded. Engine started. Life resumed its impatient rhythm. She stood there alone, one hand resting on the curve of her stomach, the other clenched inside her coat pocket so tightly her nails bit into her skin. Her father was gone, and with him, the only person who had ever loved her without conditions. "You ready?" her husband asked. His voice was flat, not unkind, just finished. She turned to him, blinking through the cold wind and the exhaustion that had settled deep in her bones over the last week. The pregnancy had made everything heavier, her body, her grief, the air itself. "Ready for what?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He looked around the cemetery instead, at the modest headstone, at the simple service, at the lack of grandeur. That had always irritated him. "Let's go somewhere private," he said. "We need to talk." The drive was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, it's loaded. She watched the city pass by through the passenger window, her father's voice echoing in her head from years earlier. "People will always underestimate silence," he used to say. Let them. She didn't know then how much that would matter. At home, he didn't take off his coat, didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of the living room like a man delivering bad news he'd already practiced. "I'm filing for divorce," he said. The words landed without drama. No shouting, no shaking hands, just a statement. Her breath caught. "What? This isn't working," he continued, already defensive. "And before you start, this isn't about today. I've been unhappy for a long time." She stared at him, searching his face for something. Hesitation, guilt, doubt. There was none. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "That doesn't change things." Something inside her went very still. "Is there someone else?" she asked. He hesitated just long enough to answer honestly. "Yes." The room tilted. "She understands me," he said quickly, as if that explained everything. "She doesn't live in the past. She doesn't cling. She wants a real life. A real life." She thought of the nights she'd stayed up sick and exhausted, of the moves she'd made for his career, of the way she'd swallowed disappointment because she believed marriage meant patience. "And the baby?" she asked. He exhaled sharply. "I'll do what I'm legally required to do." Legally. Not lovingly. Not responsibly. Not willingly. She felt a wave of nausea rise, not just from the pregnancy, but from the clarity settling in. "You waited until after my father's funeral," she said. He looked uncomfortable for the first time. "I didn't want to add stress." She almost laughed. Her father, quiet, unassuming, forgotten by the world, had been the only one who'd warned her about this man. Not with accusations, just observations. "He values what he can show people," her father had said once. "Be careful marrying someone who mistakes image for substance." She lowered herself onto the couch slowly, one hand bracing her back. "I need time," she said. "You can take a few days," he replied. "But I'll be moving out." "She's waiting. Waiting." As he walked toward the door, he paused. "You should know. My lawyer will be in touch. I want this clean." The door closed behind him with a soft click. No slam. No final argument. Just absence. She sat there for a long time, staring at the wall where their wedding photo still hung. Her reflection in the glass looked older than she felt. Tired, but not broken. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I'm sorry. He says this is for the best." She deleted it without replying. Outside, the evening light faded, and the house settled into unfamiliar silence. She placed both hands on her stomach now, breathing slowly, deliberately. "I've got you," she whispered. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that the man they had buried that morning hadn't been ordinary. Her father hadn't lived quietly because he had nothing. He had lived quietly because everything he owned was hidden behind layers of trusts, foundations, and silence measured in continents instead of bank accounts. A fortune so vast it bent governments. A legacy designed to stay invisible until the moment it was needed. And as her husband drove away to start his new life with his mistress, convinced he'd escaped a sinking ship, the world was quietly rearranging itself around the woman he'd just abandoned. Because the most dangerous thing about underestimating someone is doing it right before the truth arrives. The lawyer arrived 3 days later, not with flashing cars or dramatic urgency, but with a plain black umbrella, and a quiet knock that sounded almost apologetic. The rain had started sometime before dawn, steady and unremarkable, the kind that soaked into everything without asking permission. She opened the door slowly. "Yes?" she asked. "Mrs. Hale," the man said gently. "My name is Samuel Crow. I represented your father." Her breath caught. "The estate lawyer?" Crow nodded once. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, heart suddenly pounding, not with greed or curiosity, but with a strange unease she couldn't explain. Her father's affairs had always been simple, or so she believed. A small house, a few accounts, old habits. Crow didn't sit at the dining table. He chose the armchair near the window instead, placing his briefcase at his feet like it contained something fragile. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. "Your father was singular." She managed a nod. "He lived quietly." Crow's mouth twitched. "Yes, very." He opened the briefcase and removed a single folder. Thick, heavy. "There are things your father asked me not to explain until after his death," he continued. "And only to you." She folded her hands over her stomach instinctively. "Is something wrong?" "No," Crow said. "Something is about to become very large." He slid the folder across the coffee table. On the first page was her name. Full legal name. Correct spelling. Dates. Identifiers she hadn't seen on any document before. Below it, a title. Primary beneficiary. Her throat went dry. "What is this?" "Your inheritance," Crow replied. She frowned. "My father didn't have." Crow raised a hand gently. "Your father had everything." Silence filled the room, broken only by the rain tapping the glass. "He built it quietly," Crow said. "Decades ago, before you were born. He never wanted it to touch your life unless it had to." She stared at the pages, eyes skimming numbers she didn't yet understand. "There's a mistake," she said faintly. "He drove the same car for 20 years. "Yes," Crow replied, "so that no one would ever look twice." She flipped the page. Then another. Her pulse roared in her ears. "This can't be right," she whispered. Crow leaned forward. "Your father controlled assets across energy, infrastructure, real estate, sovereign debt instruments. Holdings routed through trusts, shell foundations, and international custodians." She looked up, stunned. "How much?" Crow didn't answer immediately. "Your father disliked numbers used for shock," he said carefully. "But if you require one." He paused. "Conservatively estimated, just over $1 trillion. The room spun. She pressed a hand to the armrest, breathing shallowly. The baby shifted inside her, as if responding to the sudden tension. "1 trillion, she repeated. That's impossible." Crow met her gaze. "It's already verified." Her mind raced, images colliding. Her husband's words. His impatience. His mistress. The way he'd looked at her father's funeral and seen nothing worth respecting. "He never told me," she said. Crow nodded. "He didn't want you loved for the wrong reasons. Or left for the right ones." Tears welled, unexpected and sharp. "He said if you were ever abandoned when you were most vulnerable." Crow continued softly. "That would be the moment this knowledge mattered." Her breath hitched. "And if I hadn't been?" she asked. "Then the wealth would have stayed silent," Crow replied. "And you would have lived a quieter life." She closed her eyes briefly. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from her husband. "My lawyer sent paperwork. Let's move quickly." She looked at the screen, then back at Crow. "What happens now?" she asked. Crow straightened. "Now you decide how visible you want to be." She placed both hands on her belly, grounding herself. "No," she said slowly. "Not yet." Crow inclined his head. That was also his hope. Outside, the rain continued to fall, unaware that beneath one modest roof, the balance of power in several countries had just shifted. And somewhere else in the city, a man was celebrating his freedom with a woman who believed she'd won. Neither of them had any idea that the life they thought they were escaping had just quietly caught up to them. She didn't tell anyone. Not her friends. Not her husband's lawyer. Not even the nurse at her next prenatal appointment, who smiled kindly and asked if she had support at home. "I do," she said, and for the first time, it was true in a way no one else could see. Crow returned twice that week. Each time, he brought less paper and more clarity. They spoke in low voices, curtains drawn, as if the house itself was still adjusting to the truth. He explained layers, how the trusts worked, how the holdings were insulated, how entire governments leased land her father technically owned through third parties who never knew his name. He believed anonymity was the only real freedom, Crow said. She believed that too now. Her husband's lawyer was aggressive. Emails arrived daily. Timelines. Threats wrapped in politeness. Attempts to rush mediation before assets could complicate matters. She read them calmly, then ignored them. What about him? She asked Crow one afternoon. Legally. Your husband, Crow replied. He has no claim. Your father's estate predates the marriage by decades. Everything is shielded. And the baby? She asked quietly. Crow's expression softened. Your child is protected beyond imagination. She nodded, absorbing that. What unsettled her wasn't the wealth. It was the clarity. Her husband hadn't just left her. He'd timed it, measured her grief, calculated her vulnerability. He'd mistaken her silence for weakness. And that realization hurt more than the divorce itself. One evening, as dusk settled, she stood in the nursery she'd begun assembling alone. Half-painted walls, a crib still in its box. She rested a hand on her stomach and felt the baby move, steady, insistent. I will never let you be treated as optional, she whispered. Her phone rang. His name. She stared at it for a long moment, then answered. What do you want? She asked calmly. He sounded irritated. You've been ignoring my lawyer. I've been grieving, she replied. A pause. Look, I didn't want this to get ugly. But delays don't help anyone. You mean you? She said. He scoffed. Don't start. I won't, she replied. I'm finished. Silence. Then, softer, manipulative. You know I'll take care of you. Of the baby. Just be reasonable. Reasonable. She almost laughed. I'll let my lawyer speak for me, she said, and ended the call. Crow watched her carefully when she told him. You're ready, he said. For what? She asked. To stop protecting people who never protected you. The mediation date was set. Her husband arrived confident, arm loosely around his mistress, who wore white like a statement. They whispered and laughed as if the room belonged to them. She arrived alone. No designer dress. No entourage. Just a calm presence and a quiet certainty. When the mediator asked if there were undisclosed assets, her husband leaned forward. No, he said quickly. There's nothing of value. She said nothing. Not yet. Because the truth wasn't something you shouted. It was something you let arrive. And when it did, it would change everything. The mediator adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Before we proceed, he said carefully, I need both parties to confirm, under oath, whether there are any assets not previously disclosed. Her husband didn't hesitate. No, he said again, firmer this time. There are none. The mistress crossed her legs and smiled, already bored. The mediator turned to her. She placed one hand on the table, the other instinctively resting on her stomach. Yes, she said quietly. The word landed softly, but it changed the temperature of the room. Her husband blinked. What? The mediator looked up. Mrs. Hale. She met his eyes. Calm. Steady. Unapologetic. There are assets, she said. They were never marital property. But they do exist. Her husband laughed sharply. This is ridiculous. You don't have anything. She didn't look at him. Mr. Crow, she said instead. The door opened. Samuel Crow entered the room, umbrella still folded in his hand, briefcase carried like something that had weight beyond leather and paper. The mediator stiffened. Mr. Crow? Crow nodded politely. Representing the Hale estate. Her husband's smile faltered. What estate? Crow took his seat and opened the briefcase. Before we continue, Crow said evenly, I need the record to reflect that Mrs. Hale is the sole beneficiary of an independent trust established long before her marriage. Her husband leaned forward, irritation sharpening into suspicion. Independent how? Crow slid a single document across the table. Internationally, he replied. The mediator scanned it. His face changed, not dramatically, but unmistakably. The mistress frowned. What is this? Crow didn't answer her. Assets include, Crow continued calmly, global infrastructure holdings, energy reserves, sovereign lease agreements, and controlling interests in multiple multinational trusts. Her husband's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. Crow met his gaze. No. Silence fell. The mediator cleared his throat again, this time slower. Can you quantify the value? Crow paused. Current conservative valuation, he said, exceeds $1 trillion. The mistress laughed, one short, disbelieving sound. That's not funny, she said. No one smiled. Her husband's face drained of color. This is some kind of stunt. She finally looked at him then. No, she said softly. This is my father. The room felt smaller. My father, she continued, lived quietly because he wanted to know who loved me when there was nothing to gain. Her husband stared at her like he was seeing a stranger. You knew? He demanded. I learned, she replied. After you left. The mediator set his pen down carefully. To be clear, he said, these assets are not subject to division? Crow nodded. They are not. And child support? The mediator asked. Crow's voice was calm, precise. Mrs. Hale will not be seeking financial support. Her husband's head snapped toward her. What? She didn't raise her voice. I won't take your money, she said. I don't need it. The mistress shifted uncomfortably now, eyes darting between them. Her husband swallowed. Then what do you want? She held his gaze. No anger, no triumph. I want distance, she said. And I want you to understand something. He waited. You didn't leave a poor woman, she continued. You left a protected one. Crow closed the briefcase. The mediator nodded slowly, stunned. Given this information, he said, we'll be revising the proceedings immediately. Her husband sat back, stunned, the confidence gone, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. Fear. Because for the first time, he understood what he had done. He hadn't escaped the sinking ship. He had jumped from one that was unsinkable, and the woman he thought he'd outgrown had just outgrown the need to explain herself at all. The settlement was finalized in silence. No raised voices. No last-minute demands. No dramatic exits. Her husband signed where he was told, hands unsteady now, eyes flicking toward her as if searching for some crack, some opening where he could explain himself back into relevance. There wasn't one. The mistress didn't speak again. She stared at her phone, then at the floor, then finally at the door like someone realizing too late they'd misread the room they were in. When it was over, the mediator stood and offered his hand to her. Mrs. Hale, he said respectfully, if you need anything further. I won't, she replied gently. Crow walked her out into the daylight. The rain had stopped. The city smelled clean, like something had been washed away. You handled that with restraint, Crow said. She smiled faintly. My father taught me that power doesn't need to announce itself. Crow nodded. He would be proud. She went home alone. The house was still half empty, echoes lingering in rooms that had once felt crowded with compromise. She walked slowly, one hand resting on her stomach, feeling the steady reminder of what mattered most. That night, she slept deeply for the first time since the funeral. Weeks passed. The news never broke. No headlines. No whispers. No exposés. Her father's empire remained what he'd intended it to be. Quiet, immovable, invisible to anyone who didn't already know where to look. Boards met. Assets shifted. Governments renegotiated leases without ever learning the name behind the signature. And she stayed exactly where she was. Same house. Same prenatal clinic. Same routines. The only difference was the stillness inside her. Her husband tried to reach out once more. An email. Long, careful. Apologetic in places where apology cost nothing. He spoke about fear. About pressure. About making mistakes. He didn't mention love. She read it once, then archived it without reply. Closure didn't require conversation. Her daughter was born on a quiet morning, sunlight spilling through the hospital blinds. Strong lungs. Clear eyes. A weight in her arms that made every other number meaningless. She named her after her father. Not because of the money, because of the patience. As she held her baby close, she whispered, "You will never be treated as optional." Not by anyone. Years later, she would begin to move. Not loudly, not suddenly. A scholarship fund appeared. Anonymous. A hospital wing was renovated. No name attached. Entire neighborhoods stabilized without knowing who had protected them. People would speculate. They always did. But no one ever guessed the truth. As for her ex-husband, life unfolded the way it often does for people who confuse access with achievement. The mistress didn't stay. The story he told himself about starting over lost its shine when there was nothing left to climb onto. He heard rumors, eventually, about influence, about reach, about a woman who never appeared on lists but seemed to shape outcomes from the shadows. He never confirmed them. He was afraid of the answer. One evening, years later, she stood in her father's old study, the modest one everyone had underestimated. She found a final letter tucked behind a shelf, written in the same careful hand she'd known all her life. If you're reading this, you learned what silence can do. She smiled through tears. Her father had known. He'd known the man she married. He'd known the moment she'd need to stand alone. He'd known that true wealth wasn't protection from loss. It was clarity after it. The husband who divorced his pregnant wife to marry his mistress thought he was choosing abundance. What he actually chose was absence. And the woman he left behind? She never needed revenge. She never needed spectacle. She never needed him to regret it out loud. Because the greatest inheritance her father left her wasn't measured in trillions. It was the freedom to be underestimated, and the strength to let the truth arrive when it was ready.